I'd like to welcome Ripon here today, who's going to talk to you all about universal credit. As I mentioned earlier, I know it's a hot topic. Everyone's quite concerned about the rollout of universal credit in Hackney and how that might affect everyone's financial well-being. So over to you, Ray. Thanks very much. Oh, one more thing. Is everyone feeling okay temperature-wise? Because the aircon is on. Do you want me to turn the aircon off? Okay, I'll do that. All right.
Just move the microphone a bit. That's it.
Great. Can you all hear me? Is it clear?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, my name is Ripon. The reason I decided to give this talk is because, as you heard, universal credit is not a big topic, but it's also causing a lot of not just simply financial hardship, but it's actually causing to rise in rent arrears. From my experience of giving advice in 3 boroughs, Hackney, Newham and Tower Hamlets, what I've seen is that in Tower Hamlets specifically, there's been a rise in 83% from those who are local authority tenants and are on rent arrears. That's when universal credit was first rolled in Tower Hamlets. Now, as you probably know, universal credit has now been rolled in Hackney, and that started in October. So the question is, what is it for you all? For some people, it may seem like an alien, and in fact, I've come across a couple of individuals who asked me, what is universal credit? So the reason you might see a weird person or a weird thing over there is because for some people it is unknown. And those who do know it, their voices aren't being heard as much. So really, my reason for standing in front of you is really to let you know what it is and what it isn't, how it impacts you, and if there are difficulties, how you can deal with it. But I suppose the way I'm looking at it, it's really coming from the debt point of view. In a sense, when you are genuinely struggling financially, what sort of options available in the context of universal credit? So, in a sense of looking at it holistically. So that's what it is. But of course, in order for us to look at all sorts of things in the context of money trouble, we might as well start with universal credit itself, and let's demystify that alien that it seemed to have invaded Hackney from October 2018. So yeah, so do you mind if I ask anyone, what do you think universal credit actually mean? Could anyone put their hand up and say what it is? Go ahead.
I think universal credit means that our rent money will be going directly to the banks, and they'll be used for our overdrafts. So if we are in rent arrears, then we'll be homeless.
Okay, is it a very good one? Absolutely. That's the main concern from individuals, yes. Is it any other meaning or definition?
Is it combining all benefits, everything together as a whole?
Very good question. Okay, yes, there are elements of combination of number of benefits together. Yes. Any other?
The rent's capped, isn't it? If you've got rent that's not if it's over the amount they're prepared to give you, then obviously you've got to pay the arrears, and that's why everybody's in rent arrears, because they're not covering the full rent.
Very good point. Actually, it's not necessarily there is a rent cap, but it's more like a benefit cap. Yeah. But there are exemptions, and we'll talk about that as well. Is there any other questions? Okay. So let's now start with the basics in terms of universal credit. Yes, so many of you have mentioned, yes, it incorporates a number of benefits together, but it's not necessarily every benefit. What we are mostly talking about, the buzz term really, if you look at it on the screen, it's means-tested benefit or income-related benefit. So does anyone know the difference between means-tested benefit and non-means-tested benefit? No? Do you? So means-tested benefit is when, let's say, your income is low and you can't afford to pay your rent or live, and you have not made contribution towards national insurance. So that's what it is. It's about contribution towards national insurance and not contributing towards national insurance. That's one thing. It gets very complicated, so I need to be very careful. The other thing is, of course, you may have heard of personal independent payment and disability living allowance. Those benefits are non-means tested. In other words, any benefits that you get that are not counted towards your overall income, they are non-means tested. So what we're dealing with when it comes to universal credit, it kicks in the moment we're talking about, in principle though, when your income is very low and you have no security. You may not have contributed toward national insurance. So therefore, it's focusing on means-tested benefits. So when we talk about job seekers allowance, we're dealing with means-tested job seekers allowance and means-tested employment support allowance. So you need to bear that in mind. So what you see there, so when we're talking about all those benefits, child benefit, housing benefit, income support, income-based job seekers allowance, income-related employment support allowance. We are not talking about contribution-based job seekers allowance, contribution-based employment support allowance. So you need to be very clear. Universal credit, yes, it's there, but there in order to make sure you're getting the money that you need to survive based on your income. Simple as that. Yeah, so that's what it is. So yes, it includes child tax credit, because child tax credit is also means tested. If your household is getting certain amount of money, you're not entitled to child tax credit. And the same will apply with housing benefit. And in universal credit, it won't be called housing benefit, it will be called housing element. For children, it will be called child element, and for income support, it will be called personal allowance. In other words, it may be job seekers allowance, it may be employment support allowance, it may be income support, but all based on your personal circumstance, therefore it will be called personal allowance. So yes, many of you have already pointed out, it is something that you get on a monthly basis. It's one lump sum, includes all these things together, including working tax credit. So yeah, so that's kind of what it is. And earlier I mentioned what it isn't. You can see from the point of view of carers, it doesn't include carers allowance. It doesn't include child benefit. It doesn't include attendance allowance, personal independence payment, and disability living allowance. Again, those benefits are non-means tested. You get it if you're especially with disability living allowance and personal independence payment and attendance allowance. If you're a billionaire, you can still get disability living allowance and PIP and attendance allowance, because the welfare state that we have currently now, it looks at individual and the circumstances regardless of their income. So you'll be able to get those if you need support and care for your disability. So the state recognizes that in order for all of you to have a level playing field, you will need financial support, regardless of you being a millionaire or a billionaire. So therefore, if you have a disability that prevents you from doing certain things and you need support with care, you can get disability living allowance. If you're a minor or you're under the pension age, currently it's now changed from disability living allowance. If you're currently making a new claim, you have to make a personal independence payment. So just do bear in mind, an attendance allowance for those who are pensioners, 65 plus, if I understand it correctly. But the formula is primarily the same. You will need support and care for your disability, and state recognizes that because you have, there are lots of challenges because of your disability. You will need all sorts of support, but most primarily financial support. It's a well-known fact that if you are actually suffering from disability of some sort, you're bound to be more in poverty. So the state recognizes that, and therefore it compensates you for your loss due to your disability by giving you money. So that's what it is. That's why you get disability living allowance, personal independence payment, attendance allowance. And the reason carers allowance is not included, we'll talk about it a bit later. So if we then go in the context of carers, go ahead, ma'am.
Can you go back to the point you was on previously?
This one?
Yes. So when somebody retires, do they then get personal independent payment and attendance allowance, or only attendance allowance?
Only attendance allowance. Obviously, there will be a transition for sure. But if you're making a fresh claim and you're a pensioner, if I understand it's 65 plus at this moment in time, you will have to make a claim for attendance allowance. It will be a fresh claim, yes. So when it comes to if you're of working age and you're suffering from disability and you need care and support, you will definitely apply for disability living allowance. And that also, well, actually, with old benefits, disability living allowance, absolutely. But currently, if you're of working age, you'll be applying for personal independence payment.
And when you're a pensioner, you do not get disability living allowance?
I mean, its wording has changed. You'll be applying for attendance allowance instead.
Sorry?
You'll be applying for attendance allowance instead.
Attendance allowance takes the place of disability living allowance and PIP.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, yeah, so if you're making a new claim now, you won't be making disability living allowance, it's gone. It will be PIP. But I understand that a number of people are already in disability living allowance, partly because they have not been migrated to or their benefit has not stopped yet. If your benefit stops when it comes to disability, let's say non-means tested benefit, they will say, can you claim PIP, please? So here we are. So now, going back to carers, any other questions?
So
No?
this may seem a little bit off. So if you're making a new claim, do they not ask you about the sort of the means testing is, the
For-
non-means tested, like those? So when you make a universal credit claim, a new claim, do they ask you about, do you get carers allowance? Do they?
No, because no. No. So the question is, do DWP, let's say, ask you whether if you're on PIP or DLA, when you're getting US universal credit, do they ask you about DLA or PIP? The answer is no, because they're mutually exclusive. They are non-means tested. However, their record will show you've got it, but it's primarily for your care. And universal credit is for your income.
I was just wondering, because if it's a new claim today,
Yeah.
because I actually filled out, I was looking at somewhere, I was hoping to fill it out, I'm sure it asked some of those questions. Like,
Yeah. Oh yeah, but the money that you get is separate. Universal credit is designed for your living. In order to, let's say, if you're getting job seekers allowance, income-based. If you're getting employment support allowance, income-based, is covered. So you have the personal allowance for what you need to survive, and then you have a housing element in order to pay your rent. If you have children, it will have child's element. So that's kind of primarily how it works. The terminology may change depending upon your circumstance, because not everyone will be claiming job seekers allowance, not everyone will be claiming employment support allowance, but it depends. If you're a worker, if you're a mother, father, your circumstances will determine what kind of income you get in the end. I do apologize, I did say it's very complicated, but it is what it is. It will take a while for people to sink in. It's not as easy as it is. That's why I'm wary about the time as well. So with carers, what happens is, or what kind of support can they get in the context of universal credit? First, you need to realize that being a carer is difficult. It is very difficult, and especially when there is no support around you. So in the context of main support, local authorities play a huge part, especially, let's say, if you need equipment and training and education to do your care, to do your job properly, basically, as a carer. So social services of the council will assess you through care assessment to see what kind of training you need, what kind of support you need, what kind of equipment that you might need. If you need training, they're going to help you with that to be an effective carer. Also, if you're stressed about, let's say, the job that you're fulfilling, social services are the best approach really to kind of accommodate your need, because being a carer, don't forget, from the point of view of your role as a carer, and we'll go on to talk about the income that you may be able to get. It's from the point of view of authorities, it's a full-time job. So it literally is a full-time job. So in other words, the obvious benefit that a carer applies for is carer's allowance. Now, carer's allowance, it's if you need to quantify it, it's only £64 or something around it. But that's not sufficient. So if you're making a new claim for carer's allowance because you're caring for someone who is on DLA, as you can see, middle or higher rate of care components, so like care focused, or currently it's going to be a daily living component of personal independence payment where you need care. Same will apply with attendance allowance. Then you then qualify for carer's allowance, but then you yourself make a claim for it because you need to care for someone. And the criteria for this is you have to care for someone for 35 hours or more, you can't be in full-time education, full-time training. So that's kind of the basic income that you would get, but clearly that isn't enough. Now, because that isn't enough, you have to go back, you have to apply for universal credit. This is where you go back to, because if you're a fresh claimer, claiming, you're thinking of caring for someone and you got your carer's allowance, you then have to apply for universal credit to make up for what? Housing element. To make up for, maybe you might need income support, to maximize your income basically. Under personal allowance, housing element, and let's not forget the child component as well if you're a mother. So there are things that you can get. And as part of universal credit, what they also include is carer's element. That's basically a premium that you get depending upon your circumstance. So really, carer's aspect of benefit is very complicated. I really urge you to go and seek benefit advice to really properly assess which one you're getting in terms of you getting your best money out of it. So that's kind of in the context of carers and money. So now, okay, we already nearly halfway. How you get into universal credit? You get into universal credit, of course, when you make a fresh claim. So let's say, now in Hackney, everyone has to make a fresh claim for universal credit. That's part and parcel. Unless carer's allowance, forget that aside for now, but for basic living, personal allowance, housing element, you apply for universal credit and you'll be getting it once a month. That one, it kicks off in October. From now on, any new claim, fresh claim in Hackney, it has to be universal credit. The presumption is you do it online. Now, there are other ways to get into universal credit, and it is a natural migration. That's when your circumstance changes, and then you'll be told, sorry, it's time for you to make a universal claim. That's what it is. So the moment there's a change of circumstance, authorities will tell you, yes, it's time for you to make another claim. So you do that, and you are there. And the third one is managed migration. This is the phase we are getting towards. We're not here yet. That means basically from then on, every single one of you who are claiming any forms of benefit has to be on universal credit. Now, the government tried to trying hard to enforce it within its deadline, but it's causing a lot of problems. But as it stands, from July 2019 until, I suppose, March 2023, everyone has to be on universal credit. And it depends on where you live in the country and your family situation. I mean, if your income is very high, getting a fantastic salary, it makes no difference. But obviously, if your income is low, things not as amazing it is, then you have to be on universal credit. So how will you know that there will be managed migration? So you'll be when we talk about managed migration, it's basically when DWP will tell you that it's time for you to move on. It's time for you to be migrated. So you will get a letter in the post from DWP saying, okay, it's now time for managed migration, and you get a migration notice. It'll give you a deadline. It will say from such and such a date, you will no longer be getting your existing benefit, in this case, legacy benefit. You'll have to make a fresh claim. That's what it is, fresh claim for universal credit. So your old benefit will stop on Thursday. You may have to make a same claim either on Thursday or Friday, so there is no gap. So then, yeah, go ahead.
You said there's no gap, and we all know that people have been put into terrible poverty because there was a gap of at least 6 weeks. Why does it have to wait till the last day of the existing claim to then make a fresh claim when there is then, down to the appalling bureaucracy, there's this huge wait and people are starving?
I mean, very good. I mean, you could start early if you wanted to. It's just that the claim will start from when one stops and the other one starts.
Could it be avoided then, people having to wait for weeks without money? If they, I mean, how could they know in advance to start making a claim? How are they going to know that in 6 weeks' time they're going to get a notice that their benefit is?
Well, I mean, I see what you mean, but when it comes to, it's more like DWP is following its due process, and you then have to follow your due process. So let's say in the moment they give you a migration notice, they will say from that date your existing benefit stops.
Do you know how much period is it?
Usually 1 month. No, you'll get a notice with it saying, okay, from such date, usually a month, your benefit will stop. Can you please claim from that date to universal credit?
Because we work with lots of people who find it unable to make a claim without some support,
Mm-hmm.
and they then have to make an appointment. And
Yes.
People waiting. It's just
Very good point. In fact, from my experience in other boroughs, I can tell you in other boroughs, there are DWP's welfare universal credit team being set up, where they themselves have outreach places to help individuals to claim universal credit. So you need to kind of work, so local authorities are actually working with DWP as well as advice centres and charities to make sure individuals are getting on the universal credit ladder before it gets too late. Yeah. So you need to bear in mind the time limit. Time is crucial, and obviously I know there's concern about 6 weeks delay. In fact, I've heard longer. In fact, there's one individual I dealt with who made a claim for universal credit in Hackney, who's 9 months, 2 days pregnant, and she hadn't received her universal credit for about 4 months, and the landlord said, "Where is the rent?" The only thing I could see is a notice saying rent arrears. Well, she'd done everything she could, but by universal credit, folks are not doing their job properly, and therefore delays in getting the rent. And she's in temporary accommodation. So as you know, universal credit has been rolled out in Hackney from October fully. So any new claims, universal credit. No more legacy benefits for new claimants, and yes, you do apply online. So that's the major problem, especially those who are having obviously disabilities, definitely, no doubt. And you'll be transferred and through managed migration, and DWP will notify you of your change of circumstance. What will you get? Now, I can only tell you in a sense of that's the most complicated bit. Rather than kind of going into specifics, it's best to kind of say in London there is a benefit cap, which will include housing element, personal element, and maximum 2 children. If you have more child, obviously that's going to be detrimental to you. And actually, there has been a couple of cases I remember that went to Court of Appeal, which said something like, this is discriminatory. But that only applies to old cases, old claimants who are being migrated. When it comes to new cases, because it's a fresh claim, it's a fresh claim. So therefore, currently, the benefit cap in London, by the way, when it first started, it was £500 per week. It's now going down to £442.32p per week. That includes for a couple, children, housing element, included. And if you are single, if I remember correctly, it's about something like £300. It used to be 350, but it's gone down a lot for sure. So now, local housing allowance. Does anyone know what that is? Housing allowance.
That's your rent, isn't it?
Yeah.
The benefit, you mean, housing benefit?
Well, housing allowance is kind of set up to kind of make sure local people who are applying for housing benefit reflects their rent situation. So, for example, let's say parts of Hackney is so expensive. We know that. And housing allowance recognizes that different areas need is different. So if you're a private tenant looking to get your housing benefit paid, now if you lived in Hackney, it's going to be higher when it comes to rent, so therefore housing allowance recognizes that and you get your full housing benefit paid to make sure the demographic of your borough remains as it is, so it caters for local, otherwise you get displaced. So it is no longer valid. In other words, it won't pay you full housing benefit basically. So according to Shelter recently wrote a report. It says people in Hackney, in this borough, they'll be about £700 worse off as a result of benefit cap and also housing allowance no longer applies. Now, am I clear with this? Because you seem to be not sure. Go ahead.
So do you mean that so in the future it will be, housing benefit will be standard across the country, you won't have this local variation?
Yeah, I mean, no, it's more like in a sense of, because the place, in one way we have the place is getting expensive, so areas are getting too expensive for renting, so therefore housing allowance, it makes it a mockery out of it. It doesn't make sense, because housing allowance limit meant to reflect private tenants, what private tenants need in specific locality to pay their rent. Now, because of benefit cap, it makes it meaningless. So per month, roughly, according to Shelter, people will lose out by £700.
So people will be priced out of Hackney?
Basically, people will be priced out, yes.
Because you couldn't survive on £442 a week as a family of four in Hackney.
I agree. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's
so they're just saying.
well, I mean, the consequence would be consequence could be you can negotiate with the landlord to see if the landlord accepts lower. If not,
That would be the rent alone without
yeah,
costs and
it is.
utilities.
It is. I mean, I'm seeing. I'm.
So
Well,
social cleansing on a huge scale.
I agree with you. But it is what it is. What can we do? Yeah. Yeah.
This was my question. What can we do? Because
We voted out the government.
social housing
Yeah.
is the landlord, the local authority and the housing association has been saying that their rents have got to go up to market value. I don't know who did the market value,
Yeah.
but their rents are not sustainable. So even we are not safe, even if we are renting in social housing, because their rents are going up to market value,
Sure.
which is more than.
Yes. And the consequence is, in places where we had universal credit rolled out, according to Trussell Trust, that provides 3 days food for those who have no money. Trussell Trust is like an association of food banks throughout the country. And they said in places where you have universal credit has been rolled out, there's been a rise in 52% in the use of their food bank. So that's one. And the other is, of course, you probably heard about me mentioning it earlier, in Tower Hamlets, 83% of universal credit claimants who are local authority tenants and are in universal credit are in rent arrears. So it's quite shocking.
I know tenants have more rights
Mm-hmm.
on the local authority than they have on the housing association. Will they be evicted on the local authority for rent arrears? I know housing association can evict you quicker for rent arrears than local authority can. Is that right?
I mean, in the end, any enforcement action a landlord has to take, either housing associations or local authority, it has to take it to court. In the end, yes, it can. So long local authorities follow a due process and so long the reason provided is credible from the point of view of a judge. Because any possession proceedings you have in the context of local authority, housing association, or even a private landlord, it has to go through courts to legally execute an eviction. So I've come across cases where local authorities have taken individuals to court for eviction and have been successful. That's normal, because in the end, a local authority is a landlord. So if the landlord isn't getting the rent paid, then obviously the landlord has to think about what steps can the landlord take to recover the money. It's simple.
The local authority is the landlord that is managing our homes.
Yeah.
They don't own our homes belong to us, they're just managing our homes. So
Mhm.
how can they evict us from what belongs to us already?
I agree with you. I'm very sympathetic, but but from the point of view of the relation between landlord and a tenant, landlord gets upset when the landlord doesn't get rent and arrears, and tenant is insecure because arrears are increasing. Sometimes it's the fault of the tenant, sometimes it's the fault of whatever. In the end, we are dealing with money, and what landlord has to prove in the end, it's reasonable to expect the right to take the property back based on circumstance. There are numerous cases, feel free to take advice from a housing solicitor on this, numerous cases where rent arrears is so high but there is no point of return. It's so high that it's impossible to pay the arrears. The only option the landlord has is seeking possession of the property and renting it out to someone else who will pay
Yeah,
rent.
but then we've got a human right to be housed by the local authority.
Of course you do.
If people out on the street,
Mhm.
we've still got to
Oh, I agree.
house them by law.
Of course.
Does that make any sense?
I do. So in this case, we need to think about policy issues that we can talk about later if you like. I'm happy to talk about it. What we can do from my point of view as a debt specialist. There are ways around it. It's just, obviously, I'm looking at it from the point of view of me versus individual versus individual. So yeah, in terms of what options are there? So from the point of view of, I suppose, practical scenarios. You are in rent arrears. What can you do? One is apply for an advance payment. So let's say you're waiting for 6 weeks and it's getting too long. Your landlord is demanding money now. What can you do? One is to apply for advance payment. So whilst your claim is being processed, you can ask DWP. You can easily get a phone number, but just by going online, and say, look, can you please pay me my month's rent in advance? That's what you're saying, basically. So you can do that. It's quite easy. It's not very difficult. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am?
Sorry, why can the housing association or the council, why can the money be paid straight to them?